Welcome to the Creative Commons RX podcast. Before diving into this episode, I want to ensure we're all on the same page. This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.
All right, let's dive into a paradox that's sitting right at the heart of modern medicine: biologic drugs. These things are some of the most powerful, life-changing treatments we've ever invented, but they're also some of the most expensive. Today, we're going to unpack the incredible science and the clever regulations that are finally starting to bring those costs down. Let's get right into it. To really get why this is such a big deal, you got to start with this number: 40%. That's how much of all drug spending in the United States goes to biologics. It is a huge, huge slice of our national healthcare pie. But now get this. Those exact same drugs, they only make up 2% of all the prescriptions that are actually written. Just let that sink in for a second. This tiny fraction of prescriptions is driving a massive chunk of the entire cost. And that, right there, is what we call the biologic paradox. On one hand, these drugs have completely changed the game for diseases like cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, and Crohn's disease. But on the other hand, their sky-high costs are a massive challenge for pretty much everyone, from patients to the entire healthcare system. So the obvious question is, right, why can't we just make cheap generics for these drugs like we do for something simple like aspirin? Well, the answer isn't really about patents or business, it's about pure biology. The way these medicines are made requires a completely different way of thinking, scientifically and regulatorily. And it all boils down to this one really important scientific idea: inherent variation. You see, unlike a simple chemical that's synthesized in a lab, biologics are these huge, complex molecules that are grown inside living cells. Because of that living process, you can never make two batches that are perfectly 100% identical. There are always going to be tiny, natural differences. And this is where you have to kind of rewire your brain a little bit. For a normal generic drug, the standard is identity. The copy has to be the exact same chemical as the original. But for these complex biologics, that's impossible. So the standard had to change to similarity. The new drug has to be proven to be highly similar with absolutely no meaningful differences in how it works or how safe it is. So yeah, this whole idea of inherent variation, it's literally the scientific bedrock for the entire regulatory system. It's the reason the FDA couldn't just use the old rulebook for generics. They had to invent a whole new path, a path built on proving similarity, not identity. So regulators had a huge problem on their hands. What did they do? Well, back in 2010, a landmark law called the Biologics Price Competition and Innovation Act, or BPCIA for short, created the solution. It established two totally separate pathways for getting these drugs approved. And this chart here really breaks it down nicely. On the left, you've got the path for the original, brand name drug. That requires a mountain of clinical data to prove from square one that it's safe and that it works. But the pathway on the right, for the biosimilar, its job is totally different. It doesn't have to reprove everything. Its goal is simply to show, through direct comparison, that it's highly similar to the original. And this right here is the absolute key to understanding the whole system. The biosimilar pathway is so clever because it gets to lean on all the work that was already done for the original drug. Instead of reinventing the wheel, the company just has to focus on proving similarity. It's a really smart shortcut that saves a ton of time and, you guessed it, a ton of money. Now, you might be thinking the FDA just has a simple checklist for this, but nope, they use a really flexible approach they call the totality of the evidence. It's a holistic look at the whole picture. They assess all the data, starting with the most sensitive lab tests that act like a molecular fingerprint comparison, and then they decide what, if any, other studies are needed. So when all is said and done, this whole regulatory system creates three distinct categories of biologic products. You can almost think of it like a clear hierarchy, and it's all based on the kind of evidence that was submitted to the FDA. Let's quickly break these down. First up, you have the reference product. That's the original, the innovator, the brand name. Then you have the biosimilar, which has been proven to be highly similar. And finally, you have the interchangeable biosimilar, which has to meet an even higher bar. The big thing to remember is that while the FDA says all of them are safe and effective, that interchangeable label is a real game changer at the pharmacy. So how does a drug get that special interchangeable gold star? Well, it has to clear two extra high hurdles. First, it has to be shown that it'll produce the exact same clinical result in any given patient. And second, it has to be proven that the risk of switching a patient back and forth between the original and the new product is no greater than just keeping them on the original drug. And to nail down that second point, the whole switching is safe thing, companies often have to run what's called a switching study. It's a special kind of clinical trial designed to mimic exactly what might happen in the real world. A patient gets the original drug 1 month, the interchangeable the next. This gives everyone, patients, doctors, and especially pharmacists, total peace of mind. Okay, so we've been pretty deep in the weeds of science and regulation. Let's pull back up now and see what all of this actually looks like in the real world, at the doctor's office and at the pharmacy counter. So with all these different versions out there, how on earth do you keep them all straight? Well, the FDA came up with a pretty slick naming system. Every biologic shares the same core scientific name, like adalimumab. But then each specific manufacturer's version gets its own unique 4-letter suffix added to the end. This isn't just for branding, it's a super important safety feature. And here's what that looks like in practice. Take a look. The original drug, Humira, its non-proprietary name is just adalimumab, but an interchangeable version, Siltezo, is called adalimumab-ADB. That little 4-letter tag at the end, think of it like a license plate for the drug. It ensures that if there's ever a safety issue, we know exactly which product was involved. And for the folks on the front lines, the doctors and pharmacists who need to know this stuff, their go-to resource is something called the FDA's Purple Book. It's basically the official searchable encyclopedia for biologics. It's the single source of truth for checking a drug's approval status and, most importantly, whether it's interchangeable or not. So after all that, the science, the pathways, the names, what's the bottom line? Why does any of this matter? Well, the answer is simple: money. We are talking about massive, massive savings. In 2023 alone, biosimilars saved the U.S. healthcare system over $12 billion. The total since 2015 is already $36 billion, and that number is just going to keep climbing. When you really zoom out, what you see is the FDA performing this incredible balancing act. On one hand, you have to encourage companies to spend billions inventing new breakthrough drugs. On the other, you have to bring in competition to make those drugs affordable. And through it all, the number one priority is guaranteeing that every single biologic on the market is safe, pure, and potent. And that really brings us to the big question for the future, doesn't it? We've managed to figure out the mind-bending science, we've built this incredibly sophisticated regulatory system, and the billions in savings are finally starting to roll in. But the next great challenge isn't scientific, it's human. How do we build the confidence with both patients and doctors to truly realize the full promise of this amazing new era of medicine?
This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.